Hey guys, tonight we begin with the thoroughly unremarkable and surprisingly entertaining existence of a great horned owl, one of nature's most competent yet utterly ordinary predators who spends decades perfecting the fine art of not dying. While everyone else makes being a pex hunter look way more dramatic than it actually is, from stalking pine cones in the moonlight to awkward territorial standoffs over drainage ditches, this is the story of survival, without the placed Hollywood glamour. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've been on your own for exactly 3 weeks now, which in owl years translates to roughly long enough to realize you have no idea what you're doing. Your parents, in their infinite wisdom, apparently subscribed to the school of thought that says the best way to learn to swim is to be thrown into the deep end. Except in this case, the deep end is a forest full of creatures that are either faster than you, smarter than you, or both. Your hunting technique, if it can be dignified with such a term, can best be described as optimistic flailing. You've developed a strategy that involves perching on the lowest branch you can find, because let's be honest, you're still not entirely confident about the whole landing thing, and staring intensely at the ground until something moves. This approach has several flaws, the most obvious being that you often mistake shadows, leaves, and your own reflection in puddles for potential meals. The night of your first official hunt begins promisingly enough. The moon is full, casting everything in that silvery light that's supposed to make you feel like a mysterious creature of the night rather than a confused bird with commitment issues. You settle onto your chosen branch, a sturdy oak limb, about 8 feet off the ground, and prepare to unleash your predatory instincts. What follows can only be described as a masterclass in how not to be an apex predator. Your first target appears almost immediately, a small, dark shape moving through the undergrowth with the kind of deliberate, hesitant motion that screams, vulnerable prey animal. You lock onto it with the intensity of a laser-guided missile, pupils dilating, head swiveling to track its movement with mechanical precision. This is it. This is your moment. For 3 hours, you follow this creature's every movement. You note its feeding patterns, its apparent nervousness, the way it stops frequently to scan for predators. Clearly it knows you're there, can sense your predatory presence looming above. You're a silent shadow, a feathered death waiting in the darkness. You are become owl, destroyer of small mammals. At precisely 2:47 a.m., your prey stops moving entirely. This is your chance. You spread your wings, feeling the familiar silent flight design that evolution spent millions of years perfecting, and drop from your perch with all the grace and precision of a guided missile. You land directly on top of a pine cone. Not just any pine cone, mind you, but a particularly large, spiky specimen that has apparently been sitting in exactly the same spot since sometime during the Clinton administration. Your talons close around it with the satisfied grip of a predator seizing its prey. And for just a moment, one beautiful, ignorant moment, you feel the surge of hunting success. Then you actually look at what you've caught. The pine cone, to its credit, doesn't struggle. It accepts its fate with the dignity of an inanimate object that has spent its entire existence not being a mouse. You sit there in the middle of the forest floor, holding a piece of tree detritus, while somewhere in the distance a real mouse, probably the one you'd actually been hearing for the past 3 hours, continues about its business, blissfully unaware that it just witnessed the most anticlimactic hunt in the history of predator-prey relationships. You spend the next 20 minutes trying to figure out if pine cones are edible. They're not. Your first actual successful hunt happens 2 weeks later, and it's less a testament to your improving skills than it is to the law of averages. Eventually, if you sit very still and look vaguely threatening for long enough, something edible is bound to wander within range of your talons. That something turns out to be a mouse, so elderly it appears to be approaching its prey animal retirement years. This mouse moves with the deliberate slowness of someone who's seen it all and is frankly too tired to be bothered with predator avoidance tactics. It emerges from behind a fallen log, pauses to catch its breath, and begins what can only be described as a leisurely stroll directly toward your tree. You watch in fascination as it approaches, This is clearly some kind of test. No prey animal actually walks toward predators unless it's either supremely confident in its escape abilities or has simply given up on life entirely. You remain perfectly still, partly from hunting instinct and partly because you're genuinely curious to see what happens next. The mouse reaches the base of your tree and stops. It looks up at you with the weary expression of someone who's been through this routine before. You look down at it, wondering if this is some kind of woodland etiquette you weren't taught. Are you supposed to announce your intentions? Give it a sporting head start? After what feels like several minutes of interspecies staring, the mouse actually sighs, which you didn't know mice could do, and takes a few more steps forward. It's now directly below you, well within range of even your most clumsy hunting attempt. You drop. This time, your talons close around something warm, furry, and disappointingly unresistant. The mouse doesn't even struggle. It just looks up at you with an expression that clearly says, "Well, it's about time. I've been standing here for 5 minutes." Your first kill turns out to be less a triumph of predatory skill than an assisted suicide. But it counts, and more importantly, it's edible. The learning curve from that point is gradual, punctuated by spectacular failures that teach you more about hunting than any success ever could. There's the night you spend 40 minutes stalking what turns out to be a discarded fast food wrapper dancing in the wind. The evening you successfully catch a beetle so small it's essentially a protein-flavored disappointment. The memorable incident where you attempt to hunt a bullfrog and discover that amphibians, unlike pinecones and elderly mice, have strong opinions about being caught. But the real education, the kind that stays with you forever, comes the night you decide to try hunting a skunk. It seems like a reasonable idea at the time. Skunks are roughly the right size, they move slowly, and they're clearly ground-dwelling creatures that would make a substantial meal. What your parents failed to mention during your abbreviated hunting education is that some animals come with built-in defense mechanisms that can turn a successful hunt into a life-altering catastrophe. You spot the skunk just after midnight, waddling through the underbrush with the confidence of something that knows exactly how its evening is going to end. It's black and white, which should probably have been your first clue. But in your defense, you're still learning to distinguish between warning coloration and conveniently high-contrast prey. The hunt goes perfectly. Your approach is silent, your timing is flawless, and your strike is precise. You land on the skunk with all the satisfaction of someone who's finally figured out this whole predator thing. The skunk's response is immediate, comprehensive, and educational in ways that will haunt you for weeks. The smell hits you first, a concentrated essence of everything wrong with the world, distilled into a chemical weapon that seems specifically designed to make flying impossible. Your eyes water, your sinuses revolt. Every instinct you have screams at you to retreat, but you're too busy experiencing what can only be described as olfactory shock and awe. You release the skunk immediately, but the damage is done. The skunk, clearly satisfied with the effectiveness of its defense system, waddles away with the dignity of someone who's just won an argument without having to raise their voice. You spend the next 3 hours trying to clean yourself using every grooming technique you know, plus several you invent on the spot. Nothing works. The smell has bonded with your feathers at a molecular level, creating a personal atmosphere that announces your presence from several hundred yards away. For the next 2 weeks, you hunt alone, not by choice but by necessity. Other owls avoid you. Prey animals scatter at your approach, not from fear, but from what can only be described as preemptive nausea. Even insects seem reluctant to land on you. The skunk incident teaches you several valuable lessons about hunting. First, not everything that looks like prey is actually prey. Second, some animals have evolved defense mechanisms that make them more trouble than they're worth. And third, there's a reason why experienced predators tend to stick to tried and true prey species rather than experimenting with exotic alternatives. As summer progresses, you begin to notice that the forest is surprisingly busy after dark. You're not the only one out here trying to figure things out. The woods are full of young creatures stumbling through their own learning curves, foxes that haven't quite mastered the art of silent stalking, raccoons that are still figuring out which garbage cans are worth the risk, young deer that bolt at the sound of their own footsteps. There's something oddly comforting about realizing that incompetence is a universal stage of development. Every night, you hear the sounds of other animals making their own mistakes. The splash of a raccoon falling into the creek while trying to wash its food. The crash of a young buck running headfirst into a low branch. The frustrated chatter of squirrels who've forgotten where they buried their nuts. You're all in this together, fumbling toward competence one failure at a time. By late summer, you've reached what experts might generously call basic proficiency in the art of not starving to death. Your hunting success rate has improved to roughly 1 catch per 3 attempts, which represents a significant improvement over your early pinecone stalking days. More importantly, you've begun to think about long-term survival strategies, which is when you discover that owls, like most creatures with an ounce of sense, are deeply territorial. Territory, as it turns out, is everything in the owl world. It's your hunting ground, your safety zone, and your claim to a small piece of the world that you can defend against others of your kind. The problem is that every piece of decent owl real estate is already claimed by owls who got there first, have better hunting skills, and possess the kind of confidence that comes from never having spent 3 hours stalking a pinecone. Your territory, such as it is, consists of 3 pine trees and a drainage ditch that floods whenever it rains. It's not what you'd call prime real estate, more like the owl equivalent of a studio apartment next to a construction site, but it's yours, and that counts for something. The 3 pines are clustered together on a slight rise that gives you a decent view of the surrounding area. The largest serves as your primary roost, with branches spaced perfectly for someone of your wingspan and landing skills. The other 2 provide backup perches and strategic hunting positions. Between them lies a small clearing that attracts mice, voles, and the occasional unwary rabbit. The drainage ditch runs along the eastern border of your territory, separating your domain from a much larger and better established territory that belongs to an older screech owl who's been working this area since before you were an egg. The ditch itself is about 4 feet wide and 2 feet deep, filled with the kind of stagnant water that breeds mosquitoes and reflects moonlight in interesting ways. When it rains, which it does with depressing frequency, the ditch becomes a genuine creek, complete with current and the sound of rushing water that drowns out the subtle noises you depend on for hunting. Your neighbor, the screech owl, has what can only be described as the confidence of someone who's never had to learn anything the hard way. He's smaller than you, but makes up for it with an attitude that suggests he considers your very existence a personal insult. His territory encompasses a mature oak grove, 2 productive meadows, and a section of old-growth forest that probably contains more prey animals than you've seen in your entire life. The first time you encounter him, you're hunting along your side of the drainage ditch, focused on a promising rustling in the tall grass, when a sharp call cuts through the night air. It's the kind of call that doesn't ask questions, it makes statements, and the statement it makes is roughly equivalent to, "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you're doing?" You look up to find the screech owl perched on a branch directly across the ditch, staring at you with the intensity of someone who's just discovered that their property line has been violated. He's compact, well-groomed, and radiates the kind of territorial authority that makes you suddenly very aware of how close you are to the border between your respective domains. What follows is your first lesson in owl diplomacy, which bears a striking resemblance to a staring contest with passive-aggressive overtones. The screech owl doesn't attack, that would be undignified and potentially risky, since you're larger than he island. Instead, he settles into his perch and begins what can only be described as pointed hooting. Each call is precisely calibrated to communicate maximum disapproval while maintaining plausible deniability. He's not threatening you, exactly. He's just expressing his opinion about young owls who hunt too close to established territorial boundaries. You respond with your own call, which still sounds like a broken air conditioner, but carries what you hope is a tone of respectful acknowledgement of his territorial rights, while asserting your own legitimate claim to your side of the ditch. The conversation, if it can be called that, continues for the better part of an hour. Hoo, he says, which translates roughly to, "I've been hunting this area since before you learned to fly." Hoo, oh, you reply, meaning, "I understand your position, but respectfully maintain that I have every right to hunt on my side of this clearly defined natural boundary." Who, he responds, a single note that somehow manages to convey, "We'll see about that." The battle, such as it is, consists mainly of this. 2 owls perched on opposite sides of a drainage ditch, hooting at each other with the determined politeness of neighbors arguing about property lines. There's no actual violence, no dramatic aerial combat, no clashing of talons, just a prolonged exchange of increasingly pointed vocalizations, while you both pretend that this is about hunting rights rather than a fundamental disagreement about who belongs where. As the night wears on, the absurdity of the situation becomes increasingly apparent. You're having a territorial dispute over a drainage ditch. Not the Rocky Mountains, not the Amazon rainforest, but a ditch that floods every time someone waters their lawn too enthusiastically. The contested border between your respective domains is a man-made excavation that exists primarily to prevent someone's basement from flooding. But territory is territory, and the principle matters more than the actual real estate. You continue your vocal standoff until dawn begins to lighten the eastern horizon, at which point you both retreat to your respective roosts with the dignity of diplomats who've successfully avoided an international incident. Over the following weeks, this routine becomes a regular feature of your evening hunting schedule. The screech owl appears at his usual perch across the ditch. You acknowledge his presence with appropriately respectful hooting, and you both proceed to hunt your respective territories while maintaining a careful awareness of each other's location and activity. Gradually, you develop what can only be described as a professional relationship. He no longer bothers to hoot his disapproval every time you appear. You've established that you're not going anywhere, and he's apparently decided that your presence is tolerable as long as you stay on your side of the ditch. You, meanwhile, have learned to time your hunting activities to avoid direct competition for the small mammals that occasionally venture close to the border. The resolution, when it comes, is less a negotiated peace treaty than an unspoken agreement to pretend the other doesn't exist. You hunt your territory, he hunts his, and you both carefully avoid making eye contact when your respective patrol routes bring you within sight of each other. It's the owl equivalent of neighbors who've agreed to disagree about fence lines but maintain basic civility for the sake of property values. This arrangement suits you both perfectly. You get to keep your 3 pine trees and flooded ditch. He gets to maintain his superior attitude and better hunting grounds, and neither of you has to engage in the kind of actual combat that might result in injury, embarrassment, or having to explain to other owls why you were fighting over a drainage ditch. The experience teaches you several valuable lessons about territorial politics. First, most conflicts can be resolved through strategic posturing rather than actual violence. Second, it's possible to maintain your dignity while backing down from a fight you probably can't win. And third, sometimes the best way to win a territorial dispute is to make it clear that you're not actually interested in expanding your territory beyond what you can reasonably defend. You're developing a healthy appreciation for avoiding conflict whenever possible, which turns out to be one of the most useful skills you can acquire as a predator, with a less than intimidating appearance and a tendency to miscalculate hunting distances. Spring arrives with the subtlety of a marching band, bringing with it longer days, warmer nights, and a collection of biological urges that you're not entirely prepared to deal with. It starts as a vague restlessness, a sense that your perfectly adequate routine of hunting, sleeping, and avoiding the screech owl across the ditch isn't quite enough anymore. There's something missing from your life, though you can't quite put your talon on what it might be. Then the hormones kick in, and suddenly you understand what all the fuss is about. Your first clue that mating season has arrived comes in the form of an inexplicable desire to make noise at inappropriate hours. Where once you were content to hunt in dignified silence, you now find yourself hooting at random intervals, as if your vocal cords have developed their own agenda. Your calls echo through the forest with what you hope is an attractive resonance, but probably sounds more like a malfunctioning air conditioning unit with delusions of grandeur. The urge to hoot is accompanied by an equally inexplicable desire to show off. You find yourself attempting increasingly dramatic hunting maneuvers, even when no one is watching. Your landings become more elaborate, your takeoffs more theatrical. You spend an embarrassing amount of time grooming your feathers and practicing poses that you imagine might be considered appealing to a discerning female owl. Your courtship display, when you finally work up the courage to attempt one, is a series of movements that look like you're trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with your whole body. You've never seen another owl's mating dance, so you're improvising based on instinct and what you imagine might be impressive. The result involves a lot of head bobbing, wing spreading, and general fluffing that makes you look less like a desirable mate and more like a bird having some kind of neurological episode. You practice this routine nightly, using a particularly reflective section of the flooded drainage ditch as a mirror. The reflection that stares back at you shows a moderately sized great horned owl engaged in what appears to be an interpretive dance about the futility of existence. It's not exactly what you were going for, but it's distinctly you, and that has to count for something. The female appears on a Tuesday evening in late March, materializing on the edge of your territory with the kind of casual confidence that suggests she's been watching you for some time. She's perched on the middle pine tree, your pine tree, as if she owns the place, which is either incredibly presumptuous or a sign that she's interested in what you have to offer. She's beautiful in the way that owls are beautiful, perfectly proportioned, immaculately groomed, with eyes that reflect the moonlight like polished amber. More importantly, she's here, in your territory, apparently willing to give you a chance to prove that you're mate material. Your first instinct is to panic. You're not ready for this. You haven't finished working on your courtship display, you don't have any impressive prey stored up to offer as gifts, and you're pretty sure your territory looks shabby compared to whatever she's used to. But she's here now, looking at you with what might be interest or might be the kind of morbid curiosity that draws creatures to particularly spectacular disasters. You clear your throat, literally clear your throat, because apparently that's something you do now, and launch into your carefully rehearsed courtship display. The head bobbing commences, the wing spreading reaches maximum extension, and you begin the complex series of movements that you've convinced yourself represents the pinnacle of owl attractiveness. She watches with the polite attention of someone witnessing a performance they don't quite understand but don't want to interrupt. When you finish, she tilts her head slightly, the owl equivalent of polite applause, and responds with her own call. Her voice is everything, yours isn't. Clear, melodious, with perfect pitch and timing. It's the kind of call that probably attracts prey animals from miles around, not because they mistake it for the sound of their own species, but because it's simply beautiful enough to make them want to get closer. Your response, when it comes, sounds like a broken air conditioner attempting to sing opera. But she doesn't leave, which you take as an encouraging sign. Courtship, as it turns out, involves a lot of awkward gift-giving. The traditional owl courtship gift is prey, preferably something fresh, appropriately sized, and killed with sufficient skill to demonstrate your hunting competence. The problem is that your hunting skills, while improved, are still inconsistent enough that you can't guarantee being able to catch something impressive on demand. Your first gift is a mouse that you caught entirely by accident while landing on what you thought was an empty branch. It's small, slightly mangled from your clumsy handling, and has been dead for several hours by the time you work up the courage to present it. She accepts it with gracious politeness, which is more than it deserves. The second gift is a vole that you actually hunted deliberately, tracked for 20 minutes, and caught with something approaching proper technique. It's fresh, intact, and represents genuine effort on your part. She seems more genuinely pleased with this offering, which encourages you to continue the gift-giving tradition. Over the following weeks, your courtship evolves into a routine of parallel perching and awkward conversation. You sit on adjacent branches, close enough to communicate but not so close as to seem presumptuous, and engage in the owl equivalent of small talk. She tells you about her previous territory, her hunting experiences, her opinions on weather patterns and seasonal prey availability. You share stories about your own adventures, carefully editing out the parts about stalking pinecones and getting sprayed by skunks. The conversations are surprisingly comfortable. She has a dry sense of humor that matches your own tendency towards self-deprecating observations about the absurdities of owl life. She seems genuinely entertained by your stories, even the ones where you're clearly the butt of the joke. More importantly, she doesn't seem to mind that your territory consists of 3 pine trees and a drainage ditch that floods regularly. The relationship reaches a turning point during a thunderstorm in early April. You're both caught in your respective trees when the weather turns violent, with lightning, thunder, and the kind of rain that makes flying both dangerous and pointless. Instead of retreating to separate roosts, you find yourselves huddled together on the same branch, sharing body heat and waiting out the storm. There's something deeply intimate about sitting in companionable silence while nature demonstrates its power around you. The wind howls through the pine needles, rain drums against the trunk, and lightning illuminates the forest in brief, dramatic flashes. Neither of you speaks. There's no need for conversation when the weather is providing all the drama necessary. When the storm passes and you're both still there, still together, you realize that something fundamental has shifted in your relationship. You're no longer two owls engaged in an extended courtship ritual. You're partners, making the kind of practical decisions that couples make about weather, territory, and shared survival. She doesn't formally accept your courtship proposal. Owls don't really do formal proposals. Instead, she begins treating your territory as if it's hers too, which is essentially the same thing. She establishes her own preferred perches, learns the best hunting spots, and begins contributing to the territorial maintenance that keeps your small domain functional. By the end of April, you're officially a mated pair, which sounds much more impressive than it actually island. You've successfully convinced another owl to share your 3 pine trees and flooded ditch, and she's apparently decided that your hunting skills and conversational abilities are adequate for long-term partnership. It's not the most romantic origin story, but it's practical, honest, and based on realistic expectations rather than fantasy. The mating game, it turns out, has less to do with being impressive and more to do with being reliable, honest, and willing to share your resources with someone else. You may not be the most spectacular owl in the forest, but you're dependable, and sometimes that's exactly what someone is looking for. Nest selection turns out to be your first major disagreement as a couple. You've been perfectly happy with your current roost in the largest pine tree. It's comfortable, familiar, and offers good sightlines over your territory. She, however, has opinions about proper nesting sites that involve concepts like protection from weather, defensible positions, and suitable size for raising offspring. These are all reasonable concerns that you hadn't previously considered, mainly because you'd been focused on the more immediate challenges of not starving to death and avoiding territorial conflicts with the screech owl across the ditch. Parenthood, apparently, requires a different kind of forward planning. After several nights of what can diplomatically be called discussion, you settle on a hollow in an old maple tree that stands at the edge of your territory. The maple has seen better decades, its bark is scarred, several major branches have fallen, and there's a persistent smell of decay that suggests the tree's best years are behind it. But the hollow is spacious, well protected from rain and wind, and positioned high enough to provide security while remaining accessible for an owl of your landing skills. The hollow itself is about 3 feet deep and 2 feet wide, lined with the accumulated debris of previous tenants. You spend several nights cleaning out old leaves, abandoned bird nests, and what appears to be the mummified remains of a squirrel that made some poor life choices. The cleaning process reveals that the hollow is actually larger than it initially appeared, with enough room for 2 adult owls and whatever offspring you might produce. Your mate supervises the renovation with the critical eye of someone who's done this before. She's not, it turns out, a first-time parent. Her previous nesting experience was with an owl who had better territorial holdings and more consistent hunting skills, but who lacked what she diplomatically describes as long-term commitment potential. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you choose to interpret it as a compliment to your reliability rather than an indictment of your predecessor's character. Once the nest is prepared to her satisfaction, you begin the process of egg production, which involves a great deal of sitting around and waiting, punctuated by brief moments of biological activity that seem almost anticlimactic given the amount of preparation they require. The eggs, when they finally appear, are 2 perfect oval disappointments that require constant attention and give nothing back. They're smaller than you expected, larger than seems practical, and possess the kind of bland perfection that suggests they contain something important without giving any hint about what that might be. Your mate explains that the eggs need to be kept at a constant temperature, turned regularly, and protected from predators, weather, and your own tendency to knock things over while landing. This means that for the next month, one of you needs to be sitting on them at all times, maintaining the precise conditions necessary for whatever's developing inside those smooth white shells. Incubation duty, as it turns out, is exactly as exciting as it sounds. You spend 3-hour shifts sitting very still, while your legs go numb and your dignity evaporates. The eggs don't do anything, they don't move, make noise, or show any sign that they contain living creatures. They just sit there, requiring your constant presence and attention, while contributing nothing to the conversation. The sitting position itself becomes increasingly uncomfortable as the weeks progress. You have to balance on the edge of the nest in a way that keeps your body weight distributed evenly across both eggs without crushing them, while simultaneously maintaining enough alertness to detect potential threats. Your legs develop a persistent ache, your tail feathers get bent from constant contact with the nest walls, and you begin to understand why your parents seem so eager to get you out of the nest once you were capable of independent flight. Your mate handles incubation duty with the patience of someone who's done this before and knows that the discomfort is temporary. She settles onto the eggs with practiced efficiency, adjusts her position once, and then remains motionless for hours at a time. When she takes over from your shifts, you're embarrassed by how often you need to stretch, adjust your position, or take brief breaks to restore circulation to various extremities. The night shift rotations require coordination that tests your partnership in ways that courtship never did. You have to communicate silently about shift changes, timing, and the subtle signs that indicate when the eggs need to be turned or repositioned. It's intimate in a completely unglamorous way, less romantic partnership and more like being co-workers on the world's most boring assembly line. After 3 weeks of this routine, you're beginning to wonder if the eggs are actually viable, or if you've been incubating the avian equivalent of decorative stones. Then, on a Thursday morning just before dawn, you hear the first tiny scratching sound from inside one of the shells. The hatching process is both miraculous and slightly disgusting. The first chick emerges looking like an angry cotton swab with an attitude problem, all white down and oversized beak, with eyes that won't open for another week, and a voice that makes your early hooting attempts sound like professional vocal performance. The second egg hatches 6 hours later, producing a slightly smaller but equally indignant creature that seems personally offended by the entire concept of existence outside a shell. Both chicks are helpless, hideous, and completely dependent on you for everything from food to basic temperature regulation. Your life immediately transforms into an endless cycle of hunting, regurgitating, and cleaning up after creatures who show no appreciation for your efforts. The chick's feeding schedule requires fresh prey every few hours, which means you're now hunting not just for yourself and your mate, but for 2 additional mouths that seem capable of consuming their own body weight in food every single day. The regurgitation process is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. You catch a mouse, vole, or small bird, partially digest it in your crop, and then bring it back up in a semi-liquid form that the chicks can actually swallow. This requires precise timing too soon, and the prey isn't properly prepared. Too late, and you've accidentally digested their meal yourself. The chicks receive these offerings with the gracious appreciation of tiny feathered dictators. They open their beaks and squawk until food appears, then swallow whatever you provide without any acknowledgement that you've just spent 2 hours hunting something that they'll consume in 30 seconds. When they're not eating, they're sleeping, defecating, or demanding more food. There's no conversation, no gratitude, and no sign that they recognize you as anything more than a food delivery service with wings. Your mate handles the demands of parenthood with the same practical efficiency she brought to nest construction and egg incubation. She's established a system of shift work that ensures the chicks are never unattended while maximizing hunting opportunities for both of you. Her approach to feeding is methodical and consistent. She catches prey, processes it properly, and delivers it to whichever chick is squawking loudest at the moment. You, meanwhile, are discovering that parenthood amplifies all of your existing weaknesses as a hunter. The pressure to provide regular meals for growing chicks makes every missed catch feel like a personal failure. Your hunting success rate, which had finally reached respectable levels, drops back toward the embarrassing territory of your early pinecone stalking days. The worst part is that the chicks don't care about your hunting struggles. They don't want to hear about the rabbit that got away, the mouse that proved faster than expected, or the night when weather conditions made hunting impossible. They want food, and they want it now, delivered with the kind of regularity that would challenge even an experienced predator. Between the constant hunting pressure and the sleep deprivation that comes with round-the-clock chick care, you and your mate begin to develop a system of communication that consists mainly of passive-aggressive sighing. When she returns from a successful hunt while you're dealing with 2 squawking chicks and an empty crop, the silence speaks volumes. When you finally manage to catch something substantial while she's been feeding them regurgitated beetle parts, her expression suggests that your timing could be better. The domestic routine settles into a pattern of shifts, responsibilities, and carefully negotiated survival strategies. You hunt during your assigned hours, she handles nest maintenance and chick supervision during hers, and you both pretend that this is what you imagined when you decided to start a family together. Parenthood, it turns out, is exhausting, slightly gross, and nothing like the romantic partnership you thought you were signing up for. But the chicks are growing, your hunting skills are improving under pressure, and you're developing the kind of practical teamwork that might actually prepare you for the longer-term challenges of raising creatures that will eventually be capable of independent flight. Whether you'll both survive the experience with your sanity and relationship intact remains an open question, but for now, you're managing to keep two small owls alive in a harsh world, and that's probably the best any parent can hope for. There comes a moment in every owl's life when they realize they've accidentally become competent. For you, this moment arrives on a crisp October evening during your 4th year, as you sit perched on your favorite branch watching a family of raccoons attempt to break into a garbage can with all the stealth of a marching band. You observe their fumbling efforts with the mild amusement of someone who's finally figured out how to open containers without making a production of it, and that's when it hits you. You've become the owl equivalent of a functioning adult. Your hunting success rate has improved to what can generously be described as occasionally adequate. Where once you measured success by whether you caught anything at all, you now find yourself being selective about prey quality, timing, and hunting conditions. You've developed preferences: voles over mice, clear nights over cloudy ones, hunting zones with good acoustics over areas where traffic noise interferes with your ability to track movement through sound. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual accumulation of small competencies, each one building on the last, until you reached a level of skill that would have seemed impossibly sophisticated to your pinecone stalking younger self. You can now predict weather patterns 3 days in advance, based on subtle changes in air pressure and cloud formation. You've memorized the migration schedules of 17 different prey species, and can adjust your hunting strategy accordingly. Most importantly, you've learned to read the landscape like a book, identifying prime hunting areas, escape routes, and potential threats with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of careful observation. Your territory has expanded considerably since those early days of 3 pine trees and a drainage ditch. You now control a respectable chunk of woodland that includes 2 productive hunting meadows, a creek that attracts thirsty prey animals, and a section of old-growth forest that provides excellent cover and nesting sites. The screech owl, who once intimidated you with pointed hooting, has moved on to territories unknown, possibly driven out by younger, more aggressive competitors, or perhaps simply tired of sharing the neighborhood with an increasingly confident, great horned owl. The creek that runs through the eastern section of your territory has become your most valuable asset. It's a narrow, meandering waterway that attracts deer, rabbits, and smaller mammals throughout the year. The banks are lined with the kind of vegetation that provides perfect cover for prey animals and excellent perching opportunities for patient predators. You've learned to position yourself at strategic points along the water's edge, using the sound of flowing water to mask your approach while waiting for animals to come to you. Your 2 hunting meadows are studies in contrasts. The northern meadow is larger, with tall grass that conceals voles and field mice, while the southern meadow is smaller but more open, perfect for spotting rabbits and ground-feeding birds. You've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate which meadow is likely to be more productive on any given night. Wind direction, recent weather patterns, the phase of the moon, and the seasonal behavior patterns of your preferred prey species. The respect of other owls in the area has been earned through the simple expedient of quietly minding your own business and not dying. You've outlasted several younger owls who arrived with grand territorial ambitions and either moved on to easier hunting grounds or failed to survive their first winter. Your reputation is built on consistency rather than brilliance. You're the owl who's always there, season after season, successfully navigating the challenges that have defeated flashier competitors. Other owls now acknowledge your presence with the kind of respectful distance that indicates established territorial rights. When you call across your domain on quiet nights, the responses you receive carry a tone of recognition rather than challenge. You've become part of the landscape, a known quantity in the complex social hierarchy of local predators. Your seasonal mastery extends beyond simple weather prediction. You've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate when prey populations are about to shift, when migration patterns are changing, and when environmental conditions are about to turn in your favor or against it. You know which nights will be productive for hunting based on barometric pressure, when to abandon your usual perches in favor of temporary alternatives, and how to adjust your hunting schedule to account for human activity patterns that have changed over the years. The knowledge has accumulated gradually, each season adding new layers of understanding about the complex system you inhabit. You've learned that the best hunting occurs during the 3 days following a significant weather front, when prey animals emerge from shelter and move more predictably. You know that certain types of cloud formations indicate temperature changes that will affect insect activity, which in turn affects the behavior of insectivorous prey species. You've memorized the subtle acoustic differences between the movements of different prey animals, allowing you to identify potential targets by sound alone. But perhaps the most significant change is psychological, where once you approached each night's hunting with the anxiety of someone whose survival depended on immediate success, you now hunt with the confidence of someone who understands that individual failures are part of a larger pattern of success. You've learned to be patient, to wait for optimal conditions rather than forcing unsuccessful hunts, and to view hunting as a skill to be practiced and refined rather than a desperate scramble for survival. On this particular October evening, as you watch the raccoons finally succeed in their garbage can assault, you realize that you've become something you never expected: predictable. Not in a bad way, not boring or overly cautious, but reliable. You've found your place in the ecosystem and settled into it with the comfortable efficiency of someone who's figured out how the system works. You realize, with a mixture of pride and mild disappointment, the owl equivalent of middle management. You're competent, experienced, and thoroughly unnoticed by anyone who isn't specifically looking for an example of successful mediocrity. You handle your responsibilities efficiently, manage your territory effectively, and solve problems without creating drama or drawing unnecessary attention to yourself. The raccoons finish their meal and waddle away into the darkness, leaving behind the scattered evidence of their success. You remain on your perch, contemplating the strange satisfaction that comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to do, with exactly the level of competence required to maintain your position in a world that's neither particularly interested in your success nor invested in your failure. It's not the most glamorous realization, but it's honest, practical, and sustainable. You've become a competent owl in a forest full of creatures struggling toward their own versions of adequacy. And for tonight, that feels like enough. The first sign that your world is changing comes in the form of unfamiliar sounds drifting through the forest at dawn. Where once you would settle into your roost to the gentle symphony of settling birds and rustling leaves, you now hear the distant rumble of heavy machinery, the beeping of vehicles in reverse, and the occasional shout of human voices coordinating some kind of large-scale project. Construction equipment, as it turns out, operates on a schedule that's completely incompatible with owl sleep patterns. The bulldozers start work at precisely 7 in the morning, just as you're settling in for your daily rest period. The sound carries for miles through the forest, a low, persistent rumbling, punctuated by the metallic scraping of earth-moving equipment and the occasional diesel roar of trucks hauling materials to and from whatever project has invaded your previously quiet corner of the world. The first week of construction noise, you assume it's temporary. Some kind of road repair, perhaps, or a small building project that will be completed quickly and allow the forest to return to its normal acoustic environment. You adjust your sleeping schedule, finding deeper areas of woodland where the trees muffle the worst of the mechanical sounds, and wait for the humans to finish whatever they're doing and move on. But the noise doesn't stop. Week after week, the construction continues, gradually growing closer and more intrusive. Car alarms join the symphony, triggered by the vibrations from heavy machinery. The particularly annoying yapping of small dogs becomes a regular feature of your mornings, as suburbanites acquire pets that feel compelled to comment vocally on every unusual sound or scent. By spring, you realize that this isn't a temporary disruption. The humans are building something permanent, something large enough to require months of preparation and construction. When you finally work up the courage to investigate, flying to the edge of your territory on a scouting mission, you discover that your favorite hunting meadow, the smaller, more open one, where you'd successfully caught countless rabbits and ground-feeding birds, has been transformed into the foundation of what appears to be a housing subdivision. The meadow is gone, replaced by a grid of streets, sidewalks, and the skeletal frameworks of houses in various stages of completion. The tall grass where voles once nested has been scraped away and replaced with carefully graded soil that will eventually become lawns. The creek that bordered the meadow has been channeled into a concrete culvert that disappears beneath what will become someone's driveway. The transformation is both impressive and depressing. Where once there was a complex ecosystem supporting dozens of species, there's now a geometric arrangement of identical building lots, each one destined to become home to a family that will probably never know what existed here before they arrived. The efficiency of the destruction is remarkable in less than 6 months. The humans have completely erased a habitat that took decades to develop and replaced it with something that serves their purposes more effectively. But ecosystems, you're learning, are surprisingly adaptable. As the construction progresses and the first families move into their new homes, new opportunities emerge alongside the obvious losses. The streetlights that line the subdivision's roads create hunting opportunities that didn't exist before, pools of artificial light that attract insects, which in turn attract the small mammals that feed on them. Hunting near streetlights requires a completely different skill set than traditional forest hunting. The light eliminates the need for your superior night vision, while creating stark shadows that can conceal or reveal prey depending on positioning. You have to learn to work with the harsh contrasts of artificial illumination, using the bright areas to spot movement while remaining hidden in the darker zones between light pools. The garbage cans that appear every week along the subdivision streets attract a different kind of prey than your traditional hunting grounds ever did. Raccoons, opossums, and feral cats congregate around the containers, creating a kind of suburban hunting preserve that operates on a predictable schedule. Tuesday night is garbage night, which means Wednesday morning offers the best opportunities for catching animals that have gorged themselves on human refuse and become sluggish and overconfident. The cats that roam the subdivision present a unique challenge. They're not technically prey, they're too large and too well fed to be worth the effort, but they're territorial predators who consider themselves the apex hunters in their new environment. Most of them are soft, pampered creatures who've never faced genuine danger, but they have sharp claws, quick reflexes, and the kind of misplaced confidence that can make them dangerous to a hunting owl who misjudges the situation. Your first encounter with a suburban cat occurs on a foggy November evening as you're investigating the potential of a new hunting zone near the subdivision's northern edge. The cat is a large orange tabby, sitting in the middle of what was once a game trail but is now someone's backyard, staring at you with the kind of direct challenge that suggests it considers your presence an invasion of its territory. What follows is a brief but educational standoff. The cat clearly expects you to retreat. It's probably never encountered a great horned owl before and has no idea that you outweigh it by several pounds and possess talons designed for killing prey much larger and more dangerous than house cats. You, meanwhile, are curious about this confident suburban predator and wonder if it poses a genuine threat to your hunting activities. The resolution comes when the cat makes the tactical error of hissing at you. The sound triggers your predatory instincts, and you respond with a kind of threat display that has evolved over millions of years to intimidate much larger and more dangerous opponents than an overfed house cat. Your ear tufts rise, your feathers fluff to maximum intimidation size, and you emit a low hoot that carries the unmistakable suggestion of impending violence. The cat's reaction is immediate and educational. It goes from confident territorial guardian to terrified house pet in approximately 2 seconds, fleeing toward the nearest human dwelling with the kind of speed that suggests it has suddenly remembered that it's a domesticated animal living in a world full of creatures that don't respect suburban property lines. The occasional human who tries to photograph you presents a different kind of challenge entirely. These encounters usually involve someone with an expensive camera and telephoto lens who spotted you during your evening hunting routine and decided that you'd make an excellent addition to their wildlife photography portfolio. The first few times this happens, you're simply confused by the behavior. The humans approach slowly, making quiet clicking sounds with their cameras, apparently unaware that the electronic motor drives and autofocus mechanisms create exactly the kind of noise that alerts every prey animal within a quarter-mile radius to the presence of potential danger. They seem to believe that remaining motionless for long periods will somehow make you more likely to perform interesting behaviors for their benefit. Eventually, You learn to recognize the signs of an approaching photographer, the careful stalking movements, the oversized camera equipment, the tendency to freeze in awkward positions for extended periods. Your response is simple. When you spot a photographer setting up for what they clearly hope will be an award-winning wildlife shot, you fly to a different perch and continue your hunting routine in a location that doesn't include an audience. As the subdivision grows and matures, you find yourself adapting to a landscape that's half wildness and half suburb. Your hunting territory now includes forest meadows and subdivision streets, natural waterways and storm drainage systems, ancient oak trees and decorative landscaping. It's a strange hybrid environment that requires new skills, new strategies, and a willingness to accept that change is the only constant in the natural world. On quiet mornings, as you settle into your roost and watch the sunrise over this transformed landscape, you sometimes find yourself wondering when exactly everything got so complicated. The forest you learned to hunt in was challenging enough without the addition of human settlements, domestic animals, and the constant background noise of suburban life. But complexity, you're discovering, isn't necessarily a bad thing. The suburban environment offers opportunities that didn't exist in the purely wild landscape: more consistent water sources, concentrated prey populations, and hunting conditions that remain productive even during harsh weather. The streetlights that initially seemed like an intrusion have become valuable hunting tools. The garbage cans that attracted scavenging animals have created new food webs that you've learned to exploit. Your territory is evolving, and you're evolving with it. You're becoming a suburban owl, a predator capable of thriving in an environment that combines the challenges of wild hunting with the opportunities created by human development. It's not the life you expected when you first left your parents' nest, but it's the life you've been given, and you're discovering that adaptation is just another form of competence. Your first mate, practical and efficient though she was, moved on to bigger trees and better prospects sometime during your third winter together. The separation was mutual and undramatic. One morning, she simply wasn't there anymore, having apparently decided that your territory, while adequate, didn't offer the kind of expansion opportunities she was looking for in a long-term partnership. You discovered later that she'd taken up with a barn owl who controlled a much larger territory that included a working farm with predictable rodent populations and an old grain silo that provided excellent nesting sites. You can't say you blame her. Ambition is a respectable trait in a predator, and your own goals have always been more focused on maintaining what you have rather than expanding into new territories. She was looking for an upgrade. You were content with the status quo. The fact that your relationship ended amicably rather than dramatically probably says something positive about both of your characters. Your second mate appears in early spring of your 5th year, arriving without fanfare or elaborate courtship rituals. She's practical, efficient, and possesses a hunting style that makes yours look positively artistic by comparison. Where you've developed a preference for patient observation followed by precisely timed strikes, she employs what can only be described as a systematic search and destroy approach to prey acquisition. Her hunting method involves quartering her assigned territory in a grid pattern, checking every potential prey location with methodical thoroughness until she finds something worth catching. There's no wasted motion, no unnecessary waiting, and no romantic notions about the elegance of predation. She hunts like someone conducting a particularly efficient inventory of available resources. This methodical approach extends to every aspect of her behavior. She assesses your territory with the analytical eye of someone evaluating a potential business investment, noting the strengths and weaknesses of your various hunting zones, identifying opportunities for improvement, and making practical suggestions about seasonal hunting schedules that maximize efficiency while minimizing energy expenditure. Her evaluation of your nest site is similarly practical. The hollow in the old maple tree is adequate for her purposes, but she immediately begins modifications designed to improve drainage, expand the usable space, and create better sightlines for monitoring potential threats. Within a week, she's transformed your comfortable but haphazard roost into something that resembles a professionally designed predator residence. The eggs that result from this partnership are noticeably different from your first clutch. Where your previous offspring emerged as helpless, squawking demands for constant attention, these chicks hatch with distinct personalities and strong opinions about everything from feeding schedules to nest temperature management. The first chick, which you privately name the Critic, emerges from its shell with the kind of focused intensity that suggests it's been planning its entrance for weeks. It's larger than its sibling, more vocal, and possessed of the kind of confidence that comes from never having doubted its own importance. The critic approaches feeding time with the expectation that prey will be delivered promptly, properly prepared, and in quantities that meet its specific nutritional requirements. The second chick, the philosopher, is smaller but more observant, spending long periods studying its surroundings with the kind of focused attention that suggests it's trying to understand the fundamental principles that govern nest life. The philosopher accepts whatever food is offered without complaint, but seems more interested in the delivery mechanism than the meal itself, watching your regurgitation process with the fascination of someone studying advanced engineering. Your parenting approach has evolved considerably since your first experience with offspring. You've learned to balance feeding duties with maintaining your own sanity, establishing routines that ensure the chicks receive adequate nutrition while preventing the kind of exhaustion that made your first parenting experience feel like an endurance test. The key insight is that chicks, like most demanding creatures, respond better to consistent routine than to frantic attempts to satisfy their every immediate demand. You and your mate establish feeding schedules, hunting territories, and shift rotations that distribute the workload evenly while ensuring that someone is always available to handle emergencies. Your hunting skills, refined through years of practice, make the prey acquisition aspect of parenting significantly less stressful than it was the first time around. You can now reliably catch enough food to support a family of 4 without the constant anxiety that characterized your earlier parenting experience. Your mate's systematic hunting approach complements your own more intuitive methods, creating a kind of predatory partnership that's both efficient and sustainable. The teaching moments begin almost immediately. As soon as the chicks are old enough to focus on anything beyond immediate hunger, you begin passing on the hard-earned wisdom that has accumulated over your years of forest survival. The lessons cover everything from basic hunting safety to advanced weather prediction, delivered in the form of practical demonstrations rather than theoretical lectures. The first lesson involves the importance of choosing good perches. You demonstrate the differences between stable and unstable branches, the advantages of strategic positioning for both hunting and defense, and the subtle art of reading tree health to avoid the kind of catastrophic branch failures that can turn a routine landing into a potentially fatal fall. The second lesson covers the critical skill of avoiding skunks. You provide a detailed explanation of warning coloration, defensive behavior patterns, and the importance of recognizing when a potential prey animal is actually a predator deterrent system with legs. This lesson is received with a kind of polite attention that suggests your offspring are humoring an anxious parent who's probably overcomplicating simple concepts. The wind pattern lesson is more successful. You demonstrate how to read air currents for both hunting and flight efficiency, showing the chicks how to use thermal updrafts for effortless soaring, and how to detect the subtle air movements that indicate the presence of prey animals moving through ground cover. This lesson has immediate practical applications that the chicks can understand and appreciate. As the weeks pass, it becomes clear that your offspring are developing along different trajectories. The critic shows genuine promise as a hunter, displaying the kind of focused intensity and quick reflexes that suggest it will be a competent predator once it masters the technical skills of flight and prey capture. Its approach to learning is aggressive and impatient. It wants to try everything immediately, regardless of whether it has developed the necessary coordination. The philosopher, on the other hand, seems destined for a career in professional sitting. It's perfectly content to remain motionless for hours at a time, observing the world with calm attention but showing little interest in the more active aspects of owl life. Its approach to learning is contemplative and thorough. It studies each demonstration carefully but rarely attempts to replicate the behaviors until it's completely confident in its understanding of the underlying principles. Both approaches have their merits. The critic will probably become a more successful hunter, but the philosopher is likely to live longer by avoiding the kind of impulsive decisions that get young predators into trouble. You're secretly proud of both of them, though you're careful not to show favoritism that might disrupt the delicate family dynamics. Your mate handles the teaching responsibilities with the same systematic efficiency she brings to hunting. Her lessons are practical, comprehensive, and delivered without the kind of emotional investment that might interfere with objective evaluation of the chick's progress. She's preparing them for independence, rather than trying to maintain parental bonds, which is probably healthier for everyone involved. By midsummer, both chicks are capable of short flights and basic hunting attempts. Their success rate is predictably low, but they're learning from their failures and gradually developing the skills they'll need for independent survival. The critic has already caught its first mouse, a lucky grab that probably owed more to the mouse's poor timing than to any particular hunting skill, but a genuine success nonetheless. The philosopher hasn't caught anything yet, but has demonstrated an impressive ability to remain motionless for extended periods, while prey animals move through the area below its perch. This skill will probably serve it well once it develops the confidence to actually attempt strikes, rather than simply observing hunting opportunities. As autumn approaches and the time for dispersal draws near, you find yourself looking forward to the return of adult routine. Parenthood has been rewarding in its way, but you're ready to resume the simpler rhythms of hunting, territorial maintenance, and seasonal preparation without the constant demands of offspring management. Your second experience with parenthood has been considerably more successful than your first, largely because you've learned to approach it as a temporary project with specific goals, rather than as an overwhelming life change that threatens to consume your entire identity. You've raised two competent young owls who are prepared for independent survival, and that's probably the best any parent can hope for. Your reputation in the local ecosystem has solidified into something that can best be described as that owl who minds his own business and occasionally catches something notable. It's not the most glamorous legacy, but it's honest, earned through years of consistent competence rather than dramatic gestures or spectacular failures. Other predators in the area acknowledge your presence with the kind of respectful distance that indicates established territorial rights and proven hunting ability. The respect has been earned gradually through a series of seasonal successes that have demonstrated your ability to adapt to changing conditions while maintaining the kind of steady prey acquisition that keeps a territory functional year after year. You've outlasted younger, more aggressive competitors who arrived with grand territorial ambitions but failed to develop the patience and practical skills necessary for long-term survival. Your hunting abilities have reached what can only be described as peak efficiency. Your success rate now hovers around 70%, which is impressive for a great horned owl operating in a territory that combines forest, suburban, and agricultural environments. You've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate when and where prey will be most abundant, allowing you to focus your hunting efforts on the times and locations most likely to yield results. The peak hunting story that defines this period of your life occurs on a cold February evening during your 6th year. Snow has been falling steadily for 3 days, creating the kind of hunting conditions that separate competent predators from merely adequate ones. Most prey animals are sheltering in place, waiting for the weather to improve, but you've learned that the period immediately following heavy snowfall often creates opportunities for patient hunters willing to work harder than their competition. Your target is a cottontail rabbit that has been making regular trips between a brush pile that serves as its winter shelter and a stand of sumac trees where it feeds on bark and dried berries. You've been observing its behavior for several nights, noting the timing of its foraging trips and the routes it uses to travel between feeding and shelter areas. The rabbit is easily twice your size and possessed of reflexes that have been honed by generations of evolutionary pressure from foxes, hawks, and other predators more naturally equipped for rabbit hunting than great horned owls. Under normal circumstances, a rabbit this size would be beyond your hunting capabilities, too large, too fast, and too likely to injure you even if you manage to catch it. But these aren't normal circumstances. The fresh snow has created conditions that favor stealth over speed, and the rabbit's regular travel route takes it through an area where you can position yourself for an optimal ambush. More importantly, the rabbit has made the kind of poor life choice that occasionally tips the balance in favor of predators who are prepared to take advantage of their prey's mistakes. The mistake, specifically, is the rabbit's decision to take a shortcut across an open area that offers no cover in exchange for a slightly shorter route to its feeding area. It's the kind of risk calculation that works most of the time but occasionally proves fatal when a patient predator is waiting in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. You've been positioned in a pine tree overlooking the shortcut area for 2 hours when the rabbit finally appears, moving with the kind of confident speed that suggests it's made this trip many times without incident. Your approach is perfectly silent, the snow muffles any sound your wings might make, and your positioning gives you a clear glide path to the rabbit's projected location. The strike itself is a combination of skill, luck, and the rabbit's unfortunate decision to pause for a moment in exactly the spot where your flight path intersects with its travel route. Your talons close around the rabbit's neck and shoulders, with the kind of precision that surprises even you. This is the cleanest, most professional kill you've ever made. The rabbit's size makes it impossible to fly while carrying your prey, so you're forced to drag it across the snow to a more secure location where you can feed without risk of interruption. The process is undignified, but necessary. You're not built for hauling cargo, but the meal is substantial enough to keep you fed for several days. Word of the rabbit kill spreads through the local predator community with the kind of speed that suggests your hunting success is being closely monitored by competitors who are evaluating your territorial strength. The kill establishes your reputation as a predator capable of taking prey that most owls would consider beyond their abilities, which has the practical effect of discouraging territorial challenges from younger owls looking for expansion opportunities. Your territorial holdings have expanded significantly since your early days of 3 pine trees and a drainage ditch. Your domain now includes a small farm where barn cats keep the rodent population concentrated and predictable, a section of old-growth forest that provides excellent cover and diverse hunting opportunities, and hunting rights along a quiet country road, where roadkill attracts scavenging animals that are often too distracted to notice approaching predators. The farm is your most valuable territorial acquisition. The farmer maintains grain storage areas that attract mice and rats, while the barn cats eliminate enough rodents to prevent overpopulation without significantly reducing the available prey base. It's a perfectly balanced ecosystem that provides steady hunting opportunities without requiring territorial defense against other predators who might be attracted to such abundant resources. The old-growth forest section of your territory represents a different kind of hunting opportunity. The mature trees provide excellent perch sites and acoustic conditions that make sound-based hunting particularly effective. The forest floor is covered with fallen logs and dense undergrowth that supports populations of voles, shrews, and other small mammals that form the foundation of your dietary routine. Your hunting rights along the country road are the result of a carefully negotiated arrangement with a red-tailed hawk who controls the primary territory in that area. You're allowed to hunt there during evening and night hours when the hawk is roosting, while the hawk maintains exclusive daytime hunting rights. It's a practical arrangement that maximizes the productivity of the area while avoiding direct competition between 2 very different hunting styles. Seasonal rhythms now feel like a comfortable routine rather than a series of crises to be survived. You've developed the kind of deep familiarity with your territory that allows you to predict how environmental changes will affect prey behavior, where different species will be most active during various weather conditions, and when to shift your hunting schedule to account for seasonal migrations and breeding patterns. Spring is your least productive hunting season, when prey animals are focused on reproduction rather than the kind of predictable foraging behavior that makes them vulnerable to patient predators. You've learned to compensate by focusing on areas where prey populations are concentrated, such as the farm's grain storage areas and the creek that runs through your forest territory. Summer brings abundant prey, but also increased competition from other predators who are feeding growing families. Your hunting strategy during this season focuses on efficiency rather than ambitious prey selection. You target the species and individuals most likely to be caught quickly and with minimal energy expenditure. Autumn is your most productive season, when young animals are dispersing from their birth territories and often making the kind of navigation errors that experienced predators learn to exploit. This is when you do most of your surplus hunting, catching more prey than you immediately need and storing the excess in various cache sites throughout your territory. Winter hunting requires the most skill and patience, as prey animals are scarce and often sheltering in locations that make them difficult to access. But winter is also when your experience advantage over younger predators is most pronounced. You've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate where prey animals are likely to be active despite harsh conditions. Younger owls now sometimes perch at the edges of your territory, not quite close enough to be threatening, but clearly hoping to learn something from observing your hunting methods. You tolerate their presence as long as they maintain respectful distances and don't interfere with your hunting activities. Occasionally, you'll demonstrate a particularly effective technique or hunting strategy, partly out of professional pride and partly from a growing sense that you have knowledge worth sharing. On quiet evenings, As you settle into your favorite perch and survey your domain, you feel the deep satisfaction of knowing exactly where you are in the world and being mostly okay with it. You've found your place in the ecosystem and filled it competently, establishing yourself as a reliable predator who contributes to the complex balance of the forest community without creating unnecessary drama or disruption. You are, you realize, exactly the kind of owl you would have wanted to meet when you were younger and struggling to figure out how survival worked. Competent, experienced, and willing to share knowledge with creatures who are still learning their way through the challenges that you've already mastered. It's a modest form of success, but it's genuinely earned and sustainably maintained. You've reached the apex of what you're capable of becoming, and that turns out to be more than adequate for the life you've chosen to live. The young great horned owl who takes up residence at the eastern edge of your territory arrives on a Tuesday evening in late September, announcing his presence with the kind of enthusiastic hooting that suggests he's either very confident or very stupid. Possibly both. He's positioned himself in what was once prime hunting territory before you learned that the area floods regularly and attracts too much human attention from the nearby subdivision. It's exactly the kind of mistake you would have made at his age, which is probably why his confident territorial calls irritate you more than they should. You observe him for several nights before making contact, partly out of curiosity and partly because you're trying to determine whether he represents a genuine territorial threat or just another young owl who's about to learn some hard lessons about real estate selection. He's eager, clumsy, and possessed of the kind of confidence that only comes from never having failed at anything important. His hunting technique involves a great deal of unnecessary wing flapping and the kind of dramatic aerial maneuvers that look impressive but probably alert every prey animal within a quarter-mile radius to his presence. His first attempt at hunting in the flooded area goes exactly as you expect. He spends 20 minutes stalking what appears to be a family of ducks, apparently unaware that waterfowl require a completely different hunting strategy than the terrestrial prey he's presumably accustomed to. When he finally makes his strike, he lands in 3 feet of muddy water and emerges looking like a very disgruntled feather duster who's just learned that some educational experiences are more educational than others. You watch this performance from your perch in the old oak tree, fighting the urge to offer commentary. The young owl's technique is enthusiastic but fundamentally flawed. He's trying to apply forest hunting strategies to wetland conditions, which demonstrates either inexperience or poor observation skills. Probably both. After his 3rd consecutive night of unsuccessful hunting attempts, he finally notices your presence and approaches with the kind of direct confidence that suggests he's never met a territorial adult who wasn't impressed by youthful enthusiasm. His opening conversational gambit is a series of hoots that roughly translate to, "Hello, neighbor. I'm here to establish myself as a fellow predator in this obviously excellent hunting territory." Your response is a single, carefully modulated hoot that conveys approximately 47 different levels of skepticism about his assessment of the local hunting conditions. He either doesn't understand the subtlety or chooses to ignore it, because he immediately launches into what can only be described as a territorial presentation, complete with posturing, wing displays, and vocalizations that demonstrate impressive lung capacity but questionable strategic thinking. The conversation that follows is your first lesson in what you're beginning to realize is an inevitable part of aging, becoming the source of wisdom for creatures who remind you uncomfortably of your younger, more ignorant self. He has questions about everything: hunting strategies, territorial boundaries, weather patterns, seasonal prey availability, and the complex social dynamics that govern inter-predator relationships in the local ecosystem. Your teaching method, such as it is, involves demonstrating proper technique while internally critiquing everything he does wrong. When he asks about hunting strategy, you show him the difference between productive and unproductive terrain, the importance of wind direction for silent approach, and the subtle art of reading prey behavior to predict movement patterns. When he attempts to replicate these techniques, you watch him make exactly the same mistakes you made at his age, but slower and with more questions. The lessons cover a comprehensive curriculum of survival skills that took you years to develop through trial and error. Hunting strategy includes not just prey capture techniques, but also the importance of energy conservation, the art of reading environmental conditions to predict prey behavior, and the critical skill of knowing when to abandon an unsuccessful hunt rather than waste time and energy on futile pursuits. Territorial boundaries require explanation of the complex social agreements that govern predator relationships in established ecosystems. You explain the difference between hard boundaries that must be defended and soft boundaries that can be negotiated, the importance of maintaining respectful distances from established residents, and the subtle communication methods that prevent territorial disputes from escalating into actual violence. Weather prediction becomes a particularly important lesson as autumn progresses toward winter. You demonstrate how to read cloud formations, wind patterns, and atmospheric pressure changes to predict hunting conditions 3 days in advance. You explain the importance of adjusting hunting schedules to account for seasonal changes in prey behavior and the critical skill of recognizing when weather conditions make hunting impossible and shelter becomes the priority. The lesson on not getting killed by larger predators is perhaps the most important, covering the identification of genuine threats versus perceived threats. The art of strategic retreat, when discretion is the better part of valor, and the importance of maintaining awareness of other predators' territorial boundaries and hunting schedules. You explain the difference between bears that are genuinely dangerous and bears that are simply going about their business, the territorial patterns of coyotes and foxes that might compete for similar prey, and the seasonal movements of raptors that hunt during daylight hours. The experience of watching someone else navigate the challenges you've already mastered gives you a new perspective on your own competence. You're not just a successful predator who's figured out how to survive in a complex ecosystem. You're someone who possesses knowledge worth sharing, skills worth teaching, and experience worth preserving for the next generation of owls who will face similar challenges. As winter deepens and your student becomes increasingly self-sufficient, you find yourself looking forward to the return of solitary hunting and territorial maintenance. Teaching has been rewarding, but it's also been exhausting in ways you hadn't anticipated. The constant awareness of someone else's welfare, the emotional investment in another creature's success, and the responsibility for sharing knowledge accurately and completely have added a layer of complexity to your life that you're ready to simplify. But you're also aware that the teaching experience has prepared you for the next phase of your own development. You've learned to articulate the knowledge you've accumulated, to recognize the patterns that govern successful predation, and to understand your own place in the larger ecosystem that supports multiple generations of learning predators. You've become the old owl whose advice younger creatures seek, which is simultaneously flattering and slightly depressing. But it's also honest acknowledgement that you've successfully navigated challenges that continue to challenge new generations of predators, and that your experience has value beyond your own immediate survival needs. Teaching the next generation turns out to be both a privilege and a burden, the privilege of sharing hard-earned knowledge with creatures who can benefit from your experience, and the burden of watching them make their own mistakes despite your best efforts to prepare them for the challenges ahead. Your reflexes. You notice with the kind of mild irritation usually reserved for appliances that have begun making unfamiliar noises aren't quite what they used to be. It's not a dramatic decline, you're not suddenly unable to catch prey or maintain your territorial boundaries, but there's a subtle shift in timing that requires conscious adjustment to techniques that were once purely instinctual. Prey that once would have been easy catches now require actual planning. The split-second decision-making that once allowed you to adjust your strike angle mid-flight based on a mouse's unexpected direction change now needs to be anticipated rather than reactive. You find yourself studying prey behavior for longer periods before committing to an attack, not because you've become more cautious by nature, but because your margin for error has narrowed to the point where careful observation has become a necessary substitute for lightning-fast reflexes. Your flight characteristics have undergone similarly subtle but noticeable changes. The silent approach that was once your signature hunting advantage remains intact, but the precision of your landings has begun to require more conscious attention than it used to. Where once you could land on any branch with the casual confidence of someone who'd never miscalculated a distance, you now find yourself making small adjustments during approach, extra wing beats to control speed, minor course corrections to account for wind conditions that wouldn't have affected your trajectory in previous years. The landing occasionally involves more flapping than you'd prefer, particularly when attempting to perch on smaller branches or during windy conditions that require additional stability control. It's not dramatic enough to be considered a genuine problem, but it's noticeable enough to be mildly annoying, like developing a persistent itch in a location that's difficult to scratch effectively. Your hunting schedule has evolved to accommodate these physical changes without necessarily acknowledging them as limitations. You hunt less frequently but more strategically, focusing your efforts on prey species and hunting locations that play to your remaining strengths rather than challenging your diminishing advantages. The days of attempting ambitious hunts just to see if you could catch something impressive are behind you, replaced by a more practical approach that prioritizes consistent success over spectacular achievements. Easier prey has become a perfectly acceptable target category. Where once you might have ignored mice in favor of more challenging voles or rabbits, you now recognize that mice are abundant, predictable, and require less energy expenditure to catch successfully. The caloric return on investment may be lower per individual prey item, but the improved success rate more than compensates for the reduced meal size. Familiar terrain has become increasingly important to your hunting strategy. You know every branch, shadow, and sightline in your core territory with the kind of detailed familiarity that allows you to hunt efficiently, even when your reflexes are operating at less than peak performance. New areas require more energy and attention to navigate safely, while familiar locations allow you to focus your attention on prey detection rather than terrain assessment. Your weather sensitivity has reached what can only be described as supernatural levels of accuracy. You can now predict rain 3 days in advance, but only because your joints ache with barometric pressure changes that precede weather fronts by exactly that margin. It's a useful skill that makes hunting schedule planning much more efficient, even if the acquisition method is less than dignified. The joint pain isn't severe, more like a persistent awareness of weather changes that manifests as stiffness in your wings and legs when atmospheric pressure drops before storms. It's the kind of discomfort that's easily ignored during active hunting, but becomes noticeable during long periods of perching or roosting. You've learned to use this meteorological sensitivity as a planning tool, adjusting your hunting activities to account for upcoming weather conditions that might affect prey behavior or your own mobility. The luxury of being able to skip meals without panic represents perhaps the most significant psychological change in your approach to daily survival. Years of stored fat and hard-earned hunting wisdom have created a buffer that allows you to make strategic decisions about when to hunt and when to conserve energy. Where once every unsuccessful hunting expedition represented a potential survival crisis, you now have the security that comes from understanding exactly how long you can go without food before genuine hunger becomes a concern. This freedom from immediate survival pressure has changed your relationship with hunting from desperate necessity to professional activity. You hunt because you need nutrition, but not with the frantic urgency that characterized your younger years when every missed meal represented a step closer to starvation. The psychological relief of this security cannot be overstated. It's the difference between hunting as crisis management and hunting as routine maintenance. Your seasonal appreciation has evolved from the practical assessment of environmental conditions to something approaching aesthetic enjoyment of natural cycles. You now spend considerable time simply observing the world around you, finding entertainment in the ongoing drama of smaller creatures who are navigating their own survival challenges with varying degrees of success. The entertainment value of watching other animals struggle with problems you've already solved is considerable. Young squirrels learning to navigate tree branches with the same awkward determination you once brought to landing practice. Raccoons attempting to open garbage cans with the kind of persistent optimism that suggests they haven't yet learned which containers are actually accessible. Suburban cats discovering that their outdoor adventure fantasies are significantly more challenging than their indoor preparation suggested. There's a particular satisfaction in observing the seasonal migrations of birds who follow the same routes year after year, arriving and departing with the kind of predictable timing that allows you to use their presence as a natural calendar. The spring arrival of various songbird species marks the beginning of increased insect activity, which in turn affects the behavior of insectivorous mammals that form part of your prey base. The autumn departure of summer residents signals the need to adjust hunting strategies for the reduced prey availability that characterizes winter months. Weather patterns have become a source of ongoing interest rather than merely practical concern. You've witnessed enough seasonal cycles to recognize the subtle variations that distinguish different types of winters, the early indicators that suggest whether spring will arrive early or late, and the atmospheric conditions that produce the most spectacular storm systems. Each season brings variations on familiar themes, like watching different performances of the same play by actors who interpret their roles slightly differently each time. The human residents of the nearby subdivision have become another source of mild entertainment, their daily routines following patterns that are as predictable as those of any other species in your territory. Morning commuters following the same departure schedules, dog walkers maintaining consistent route timing, children playing in yards with the kind of seasonal regularity that suggests school schedules govern their availability for outdoor activities. You've learned to read the human patterns well enough to predict when certain areas will be busy and when they'll be quiet, information that proves useful for hunting, schedule, planning, and territorial maintenance. The subdivision's activity cycles create windows of opportunity for hunting in areas that would be too risky during peak human activity periods. Your daily routine has simplified into a comfortable pattern that maximizes efficiency while minimizing unnecessary energy expenditure. Wake up as daylight fades, assess weather conditions and atmospheric pressure to predict hunting conditions, conduct a brief territorial survey to check for changes or intrusions, hunt just enough to maintain adequate nutrition, then spend the remainder of the night observing the ongoing drama of forest life from your preferred perching locations. The territorial survey has become less about defending boundaries and more about maintaining awareness of ecosystem changes that might affect your hunting opportunities or safety. You note the presence of other predators, the seasonal movements of prey species, and any human activities that might alter the landscape or noise levels in your hunting areas. The hunting portion of your routine now focuses on efficiency and consistency rather than ambition. You target familiar prey species in familiar locations, using techniques that you've refined through years of practice. The goal is adequate nutrition with minimal energy expenditure, achieved through strategic hunting rather than opportunistic attempts at whatever presents itself. The observation period has become the most rewarding part of your nightly routine. You settle into your favorite perch in the old oak tree and watch the forest conduct its nightly business. Other predators beginning their own hunting routines, prey animals emerging from daytime shelters to begin foraging, the subtle but constant activity that indicates a healthy ecosystem functioning according to its own complex rhythms. This observational routine has given you a perspective on forest life that was impossible to achieve when you were focused primarily on immediate survival needs. You can now see the larger patterns that govern seasonal behavior, the way individual animal dramas fit into broader ecological cycles, and the remarkable consistency with which different species respond to environmental changes. The slow season of your life has turned out to be unexpectedly rich in small satisfactions and quiet pleasures that were invisible when you were younger and more focused on immediate challenges. Age has brought not just physical limitations but also the psychological freedom to appreciate aspects of existence that once seemed secondary to the urgent business of not dying. You're discovering that competence combined with security creates space for activities that serve no immediate survival purpose, but contribute to a quality of life that makes survival feel worthwhile. Watching sunrises, observing weather patterns, and tracking the seasonal dramas of other creatures have become valuable in their own right, not just as sources of practical information for hunting and territorial maintenance. The realization that you're entering the slow season of your existence is neither depressing nor alarming. It's simply honest acknowledgement that different life stages require different approaches to the business of being an Anitha. Owl. You're adapting to changing capabilities with the same practical efficiency that has characterized your response to every other challenge you've encountered during your time in this territory. Your former student, the eager young owl who once struggled to catch waterlogged ducks in the flooded hunting ground, has successfully established his own territory about 2 miles south of your domain. He returns for occasional visits that have evolved from desperate requests for survival advice to what can only be described as professional social calls. These visits now involve him showing off successful hunts, with the kind of pride that suggests he's forgotten how many mistakes led to his current competence level. His hunting technique has improved dramatically since those early fumbling days. He's learned to read weather patterns, adjust his approach for different prey species, and maintain territorial boundaries with the kind of quiet confidence that indicates genuine skill rather than youthful bravado. Watching him demonstrate these abilities produces the kind of mixed pride and mild irritation that probably characterizes most successful teaching relationships. During his most recent visit, he presented you with a rabbit that he'd caught using exactly the patience and positioning strategy you'd spent weeks trying to teach him. The presentation was clearly intended as both gift and demonstration evidence that your instruction had been absorbed and successfully applied. You accepted the offering with appropriate dignity, though internally you noted several aspects of his hunting technique that could still use refinement. The conversations during these visits have shifted from survival instruction to what can best be described as professional consultation. He asks your opinion about territorial expansion opportunities, seasonal hunting strategies, and the complex social dynamics that govern relationships between established predators. These are the questions of someone who's moved beyond basic survival and begun thinking strategically about long-term territorial management. Your responses to these consultations have become increasingly philosophical, where once you provided specific technical advice about hunting techniques and territorial boundaries, you now find yourself offering broader perspective on the patterns that govern predator success, the importance of sustainable hunting practices, and the value of maintaining productive relationships with other ecosystem participants. The transition from active territorial management to advisory role has been gradual enough to feel natural rather than forced. You've begun seeding the best hunting grounds to younger, more energetic owls, not through dramatic territorial conflicts, but through a series of quiet withdrawals that acknowledge changing capabilities while maintaining dignity. The process started with the farm territory, your most productive hunting ground during the peak years. The farmer who maintained the grain storage areas that attracted so many mice and rats sold his property to a developer who immediately began conversion to residential use. Rather than compete with other predators for the remaining hunting opportunities in the area, you simply redirected your efforts to other sections of your territory and allowed a younger barn owl to claim the construction zone as her primary hunting ground. The old-growth forest section of your territory required a different kind of transition strategy. A mated pair of great horned owls, recently displaced by suburban development in their previous territory, arrived seeking new hunting grounds with the kind of desperate determination that indicated they were prepared to fight for access to quality habitat. Rather than engage in a territorial conflict that you might not win, you negotiated a time-sharing arrangement that gave them primary hunting rights during peak activity periods while preserving your access during the quieter hours that better suit your current hunting capabilities. Your hunting rights along the quiet country road were voluntarily transferred to a red-tailed hawk who had been displaced by highway construction that eliminated her previous territory. The transfer was accomplished through a series of increasingly obvious hints that you were no longer actively patrolling that area, allowing her to claim it without the social complexity of direct territorial negotiation. Your new domain is smaller but more manageable, centered around the old oak tree that has served as your primary roost for the past several years. The territory includes the immediate area around the oak, a small section of the creek that provides reliable water access and occasional hunting opportunities, and a patch of mixed woodland that supports enough prey animals to meet your reduced nutritional needs. The oak tree itself has become more than just a roosting site. It's evolved into a kind of headquarters for your consulting activities. Other owls now seek your advice on weather patterns, seasonal changes, and the best perches for different types of prey. The tree's location provides excellent sightlines over a significant portion of your former territory, allowing you to monitor ecosystem changes and maintain awareness of predator movements without the energy expenditure required for active patrol. The consulting role has proven surprisingly satisfying. Younger predators approach with questions about territory selection, hunting strategy optimization, and conflict resolution techniques. Your responses draw on years of accumulated experience, but the format is collaborative consultation rather than formal instruction. These interactions feel more like professional discussions between colleagues than the teacher-student relationship that characterized your experience with the young owl. The odd satisfaction of being consulted rather than competing has replaced the adrenaline-driven pleasure of successful territorial defense. Where once your sense of accomplishment came from successful hunts and territorial expansion, you now derive similar satisfaction from providing advice that helps other predators solve problems more efficiently than they could through trial and error alone. The shift from competition to consultation has also changed your relationship with territorial boundaries. Where once you maintained exclusive hunting rights through active patrol and threat display, you now operate more like a respected neighbor whose presence is acknowledged but not challenged. Other predators recognize your territorial claims, but understand that those claims are maintained through reputation rather than active enforcement. Your relationship status has undergone its own evolution during this transitional period. Your mate of recent years, a practical and efficient owl who contributed significantly to your territorial success during the peak years, has moved on to someone with better hunting prospects and more ambitious territorial goals. The separation was amicable and undramatic. She simply announced her intention to relocate and left without fanfare or recrimination. You're surprisingly okay with this development. The partnership had been based on practical considerations rather than romantic attachment, and its dissolution reflects changed circumstances rather than personal failure. She needed a more active territorial partner. You were beginning to prefer the simplicity of solitary hunting and territorial maintenance. The separation benefited both parties by allowing each to pursue strategies better suited to their current life stage. The return to single life has been easier than expected, partly because your reduced territorial holdings require less coordination and management than the complex domain you maintained during the peak years. Hunting for one is simpler than hunting for two. Territorial defense is less critical when your territory is smaller and less desirable, and the day-to-day decisions about resource allocation are more straightforward when you only need to consider your own needs and preferences. The social aspect of single life has been enhanced by your new role as ecosystem consultant. The regular visits from other predators seeking advice provide social interaction without the ongoing obligations of partnership. These interactions are voluntary, temporary, and based on mutual professional respect rather than shared survival needs. Your daily routine has simplified into a pattern that feels sustainable for the foreseeable future. Morning assessment of weather and territorial conditions, brief hunting expedition to meet immediate nutritional needs, afternoon consultation period when other predators may seek advice, evening observation of ecosystem activity from your oak tree headquarters, and nighttime rest in the familiar comfort of your established roost. The hunting expeditions have become more like fishing trips, relaxed activities that serve a practical purpose but aren't governed by the urgency that once characterized your survival efforts. You hunt when conditions are favorable and prey is abundant, but you're no longer operating under the pressure of immediate necessity that made every unsuccessful attempt feel like a potential crisis. The consultation period has become the most intellectually stimulating part of your routine. Each visiting predator brings different challenges and questions that require you to apply your accumulated knowledge to novel situations. The problem-solving aspect of these consultations keeps your mind engaged even as your physical capabilities decline. The evening observation period has evolved into something approaching meditation, a time of quiet awareness during which you monitor the ongoing activity of your territory without the need to intervene or participate directly. The sounds, movements, and seasonal changes that once required immediate analysis and response can now be appreciated for their own intrinsic interest. Passing the torch, you've discovered, doesn't require dramatic ceremony or formal transfer of authority. It happens gradually, through a series of quiet decisions that acknowledge changing capabilities while preserving dignity and maintaining social connections. You're still a predator, still a territorial owl, still a participant in the complex ecosystem that has been your home for nearly a decade. But your role has evolved from active competitor to experienced consultant, which turns out to be a surprisingly satisfying way to remain relevant without overextending your current capabilities. The retirement metaphors that once seemed depressing or irrelevant now feel like accurate descriptions of a natural and healthy transition. You're withdrawing from active competition not because you've failed, but because you've succeeded well enough to earn the luxury of choosing how to spend your remaining time and energy. Your daily routine has settled into a rhythm that feels less like survival management and more like lifestyle maintenance. You wake as the last light fades from the western horizon, conduct a brief assessment of weather conditions and atmospheric pressure, hunt just enough to stay comfortable, and then spend the remainder of the night observing the ongoing drama of forest life from your preferred perch in the old oak tree. The assessment phase has become a kind of meteorological meditation. You can read weather patterns with an accuracy that borders on supernatural, not because you've developed mystical powers, but because years of paying attention to atmospheric subtleties have trained you to recognize patterns that most creatures ignore. The way morning mist behaves around certain trees indicates humidity levels that will affect insect activity. The direction and intensity of upper-level winds suggest pressure changes that will influence prey behavior. The quality of light during sunset provides information about weather conditions that will develop over the next several days. This information is no longer critical for immediate survival planning, but it remains intellectually interesting in the way that complex puzzles remain engaging even when you're no longer required to solve them quickly. Weather prediction has become a hobby that happens to serve practical purposes rather than a survival skill that determines whether you'll successfully hunt enough food to live through another day. The hunting portion of your routine has been reduced to its essential elements. You target familiar prey in familiar locations, using techniques that you've refined through years of practice. The goal is adequate nutrition with minimal energy expenditure, achieved through strategic efficiency rather than ambitious attempts at impressive catches. A successful hunt now means catching enough food to maintain your current body weight and energy levels, not accumulating surplus prey or demonstrating superior predatory capabilities. The observation period has become the most rewarding part of your nightly schedule. From your perch in the oak tree, you can see the whole ecosystem operating according to its own complex rhythms, young animals making the same mistakes you made, seasonal cycles you've witnessed dozens of times, and the ongoing processes of adaptation, competition, and survival that characterize healthy wilderness areas. The perspective from your oak tree provides a kind of elevated view of forest life that was impossible to achieve when you were focused primarily on immediate hunting needs. You can observe the broader patterns that govern animal behavior, the way individual dramas fit into larger ecological cycles, and the remarkable consistency with which different species respond to environmental changes. Young animals making their first attempts at independent survival provide particularly engaging entertainment. You watch juvenile raccoons learning to forage with the same combination of determination and incompetence that characterized your own early hunting efforts. Young deer learning to navigate forest obstacles with the awkward grace of creatures whose legs have grown faster than their coordination. Adolescent foxes attempting to establish territorial boundaries with older, more experienced competitors who tolerate their presumption with the kind of patient amusement that you now recognize in your own interactions with young owls. The seasonal cycles that once represented survival challenges now feel like the comfortable rhythm of a familiar performance staged by a repertory company that has been working together for decades. Spring arrives with its predictable patterns of increased activity, territorial establishment, and reproductive behavior. Summer brings the frantic energy of creatures raising young and competing for abundant resources. Autumn produces the dramatic migrations and preparation activities that precede winter's challenges. Winter offers the quiet intensity of survival-focused behavior and the stark beauty of reduced activity. Each season brings variations on familiar themes, but the underlying patterns remain consistent enough to feel comforting rather than threatening. You've experienced enough seasonal cycles to recognize that extreme weather events, population fluctuations, and environmental changes are temporary variations rather than permanent alterations to the fundamental structure of forest life. Your accomplishments may not qualify as heroic by the standards of adventure stories, but they represent genuine success by the standards that actually matter for owl life. You've maintained adequate nutrition through multiple seasonal cycles, established and defended territory that provided sustainable hunting opportunities, successfully raised offspring that survived to independence, and adapted to environmental changes without abandoning your core territorial holdings. The evening ritual that concludes each day has become a form of meditation on the satisfying nature of competent existence. As dawn approaches and the forest prepares for the transition to diurnal activity, you settle into your favorite perch in the oak tree and watch the world wake up around you. The sunrise process unfolds with the same reliable beauty that has marked the end of your hunting period for nearly a decade. Light gradually illuminates the forest, revealing the familiar landscape that has been your home, hunting ground, and territory through all the seasons of your adult life. The sounds of diurnal creatures beginning their daily routines provide a peaceful soundtrack to your transition from active night predator to resting day observer. This daily transition from darkness to light, from hunting to resting, from active participation to quiet observation, provides a natural rhythm that feels both sustainable and satisfying. You've found your place in the complex ecosystem that surrounds your oak tree, established your role in the ongoing drama of forest life, and develop the skills necessary to maintain that position through changing seasons and environmental conditions. The deep satisfaction that accompanies this daily ritual isn't the adrenaline-fueled triumph of successful hunts or territorial victories. It's something quieter and more lasting, the contentment that comes from having figured out how to exist successfully in a complicated world. You've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate when conditions favor hunting and when they favor rest, when territorial boundaries need attention and when they can be safely ignored, when weather patterns will create opportunities and when they'll create challenges. This knowledge feels substantial in a way that individual hunting successes never did. Each successful hunt was a discrete event that solved an immediate problem but didn't necessarily contribute to long-term understanding. The accumulated wisdom of nearly a decade of forest life represents something more valuable than the sum of its individual components. A comprehensive understanding of how to be an owl in this particular place during this particular time in B. Ecological history. The forest around your oak tree has become as familiar as your own body. You know which branches will support your weight during different weather conditions, which areas produce the most reliable hunting opportunities during various seasons, and which environmental changes signal broader shifts in ecosystem health. This intimate knowledge of place provides a kind of security that transcends immediate survival, concerns you belong here in a way that can't be threatened by temporary setbacks or seasonal challenges. The realization that belonging is perhaps the most important achievement of adult life arrives with the kind of quiet certainty that characterizes most genuine insights. You didn't set out to belong anywhere in particular when you first left your parents' nest. Your goals were much more immediate: find food, avoid predators, establish territory, survive long enough to reproduce. Belonging happened gradually, through the accumulation of seasonal experience and the development of increasingly sophisticated relationships with the place you chose to call home. Belonging, you understand now, isn't just about claiming territory or defending hunting grounds. It's about developing the kind of deep familiarity with a place that allows you to predict its moods, anticipate its changes, and respond appropriately to its challenges. It's about becoming so thoroughly integrated into the local ecosystem that your presence contributes to its health rather than disrupting its balance. The humans in their suburban habitat seem to be struggling with their own version of this belonging challenge. You observe them engaging in various territorial behaviors, property maintenance, boundary marking, social display activities that suggest they understand the importance of place-based identity. But their relationship with their environment appears more complicated than that of most territorial animals, involving layers of meaning and purpose that extend beyond immediate survival needs. Some humans seem to achieve a kind of belonging that resembles what you've experienced in your forest territory. They modify their habitat in ways that support rather than disrupt local ecosystem health, establish routines that work with rather than against seasonal patterns, and develop the kind of long-term perspective that suggests they plan to remain in place for extended periods. These humans become part of the landscape in much the same way that long-term territorial animals do: predictable, stable, and generally beneficial to overall ecosystem function. Other humans seem to be caught in a constant cycle of arrival and departure, modification and abandonment, that prevents them from developing the deep familiarity with place that characterizes successful territorial establishment. Their activities suggest they're always preparing to leave or working toward goals that will eventually take them somewhere else. This approach to territorial occupation produces a kind of restless energy that affects the behavior of wildlife in the area, nothing catastrophic, but a persistent, low-level disruption that makes the environment slightly less predictable than it would be with more stable human neighbors. The contrast between these two approaches to place-based existence provides insight into the fundamental importance of commitment to location. Successful territorial animals don't constantly evaluate whether their current territory is optimal. They invest in making their chosen territory work for their needs through habitat modification, behavioral adaptation, and the gradual accumulation of place-specific knowledge. Your own territorial success has been based on exactly this kind of commitment to place. Rather than abandoning your original 3-pine tree territory when it proved less than ideal, you invested time and energy in learning how to hunt effectively in flooded areas, how to coexist peacefully with suburban development, and how to adapt your territorial boundaries to accommodate changing environmental conditions. The result has been a territory that fits your needs precisely because you've spent years modifying both your behavior and your environment to create optimal compatibility. The lesson seems applicable beyond individual territorial success. The forest ecosystem that surrounds your oak tree functions effectively because most of its resident species have made similar commitments to place-based adaptation. The seasonal patterns that provide such reliable structure to forest life depend on the presence of plants and animals that return to the same locations year after year, creating the kind of predictable resource availability that supports complex food webs and interdependent relationships. Migration, while necessary for some species, represents a different survival strategy that requires different skills and serves different ecological functions. But the foundation of ecosystem stability comes from the presence of resident species that provide continuity across seasons and years, maintaining the basic structure that supports both permanent and temporary residents. Your role as a long-term territorial resident has evolved to include a kind of stewardship responsibility that extends beyond your immediate survival needs. The advice you provide to younger predators, the territorial boundaries you maintain, and the hunting practices you've developed all contribute to the overall health of the forest ecosystem. Your presence has become part of the environmental infrastructure that supports other species' survival and reproduction. This stewardship role feels natural rather than burdensome because it's based on enlightened self-interest rather than altruistic obligation. Maintaining ecosystem health serves your own long-term survival needs by ensuring that your territory continues to provide adequate resources and suitable habitat conditions. The advice you offer to younger predators helps maintain the kind of stable territorial relationships that prevent destructive conflicts over resources. The hunting practices you've developed ensure that prey populations remain sustainable rather than being depleted by overharvesting. The recognition that individual success and ecosystem health are interdependent represents perhaps the most important insight of your mature years. During the early years of territorial establishment, survival seemed like a competitive zero-sum game where your success necessarily came at the expense of other predators' failures. Experience has revealed that sustainable success depends on maintaining the kind of balanced relationships with other ecosystem participants that preserve resource availability for all participants over multiple seasonal cycles. This understanding has changed your approach to territorial defense, hunting strategy, and social interactions with other predators. Competition still exists, but it operates within a framework of mutual interest in maintaining ecosystem stability. Territorial boundaries are defended, but not to the point where defense activities disrupt broader ecosystem function. Hunting continues to be competitive, but successful predators avoid harvesting practices that threaten the long-term viability of prey populations. The wisdom that comes with age, it turns out, is largely about understanding these kinds of complex interdependencies. Young predators focus on immediate challenges, catching prey, defending territory, avoiding larger predators without necessarily understanding how these activities fit into broader ecological patterns. Mature predators develop the perspective to see how individual actions contribute to systemic outcomes that ultimately affect everyone's long-term survival prospects. Your evening observation periods have become opportunities to watch these complex relationships play out in real time. From your perch in the oak tree, you can observe the subtle negotiations that govern territorial boundaries, the seasonal adjustments that maintain predator-prey balance, and the environmental responses that indicate ecosystem health or stress. The young animals you observe making their first attempts at independent survival are participating in the same learning process that shaped your own development. Their mistakes, successes, and gradual accumulation of competence contribute to the ongoing cycle of ecosystem renewal that ensures the forest's continued health across generations of individual participants. Watching this cycle repeat with each new generation of forest residents provides a kind of philosophical satisfaction that transcends personal achievement. You've become part of something larger and more durable than individual survival. A continuing process of adaptation, learning, and ecological balance that will persist long after your own participation ends. As morning light filters through the oak leaves, an aging great horned owl settles into what has become a ritual of profound satisfaction. The forest around him tells the ongoing story of which he's become an integral part, the same eternal cycle of growth, competition, adaptation, and survival that has characterized this place long before his arrival and will continue long after his departure. This owl has achieved something remarkable in its very ordinariness. He has figured out how to exist successfully in a complicated world. His success is both deeply personal and temporally limited. The skills he's mastered work specifically in this place, during this particular period, requiring the kind of place-specific knowledge that can only be gained through direct experience and patient observation. The knowledge he's accumulated about weather prediction, hunting strategy, territorial management, and ecosystem relationships extends far beyond his own survival needs. Through mentoring a young owl who now thrives in his own territory, he's proven that wisdom can be effectively transmitted across generations. This teaching role has evolved into something approaching stewardship. His presence has become part of the environmental infrastructure that supports the forest's continued health. Each dawn brings the same familiar transition from nocturnal hunting to diurnal rest, accompanied by the peaceful soundtrack of songbirds announcing territories and small mammals seeking shelter. What once felt like simple relief at surviving another night has deepened into genuine gratitude for the opportunity to participate in this place's ongoing story. He's found his role in the complex narrative of forest life and learned to perform it competently. His daily routine has settled into sustainable rhythms: weather assessment, strategic hunting just sufficient for comfort, and long periods of observation from his oak tree perch. The challenges are familiar now, the solutions draw on accumulated experience, and satisfaction comes from the competent performance of activities he's learned to do well. It's not dramatic, but it's genuinely fulfilling in ways that dramatic adventures rarely achieve. He has become exactly the kind of owl he would have wanted to meet when younger and struggling, competent, experienced, and secure enough in his own success to share knowledge generously with others still learning. This represents perhaps the best possible outcome for any life, becoming the creature you would have been grateful to encounter when you most needed guidance. As late autumn settles over his territory with golden light, he's reached the age where comfort matters more than territory, where a good perch outweighs the best hunting ground. The forest has changed considerably during his lifetime, trees fallen and grown, the creek shifted course twice, new growth filling spaces where giants once stood. He finds this eternal cycle comforting rather than disturbing, proof that the system works and that his eventual departure will be just another small adjustment in a much larger story. His legacy is appropriately modest. Successful offspring scattered across the region, a small reputation for competence among local predators, and the knowledge that he managed to be a perfectly adequate owl in an often inadequate world. In a world that rewards flash over substance, being genuinely good, not great or legendary, but authentically good, feels like an achievement worth taking pride in, right up until the moment when even pride becomes unnecessary.